So I just named the slide. I just put together a slideshow to kind of just navigate the conversation. Again, the goal here is to discuss and have some interactions. What I'm discussing here in the presentation is really just information. And I think that the value that we'll take on this is going to come out of the conversation. So this is a discussion about the police expansion, the plays and talking points. Um, we call it the propaganda in the activist world that I'm in. A rising crime and support for a police has always, or is always a major media talking point during political seasons. As we all know, there are elections coming up right now. There are folks jockeying for a position. And so, of course, the issue of public safety, especially in our current increase of gun crimes, is definitely a hot topic. The police engage the community through community groups to hear concerns, to show empathy, and and also to show resolve in the correcting their issues. We all know that there are a lot of issues in policing, and a big part of the ongoing conversation is actually about the reform or the attempts to reform and the resistance to reform. Uh, let's see, conservative groups often conduct skewed surveys to create a public perception of a police report, of police support. Um, Let me keep on going here. On the side here, I've got slides from a couple of meetings. The building bridges of understanding in our it's called community meetings. I was actually in this one this week for 2021. And these are meetings essentially where it's set up with the folks in the community, from school superintendents to pastors to Muslim religious group leaders, the DA Billy Williams, people like that are all there, as well as like children from high schools who complain about crime and danger in their neighborhoods, and then the folks show empathy and promise to change, and everyone feels better. There's also meetings like these surveys that are shown here below, where surveys are conducted by groups like the People for Portland, which are really conservative groups that pick and choose their information to control it in the media. So the first slide I have here discussing kind of the major issues here is media and politics. Both large as well as small media latch on to stories that people want to hear. And a few things grab more attention than rising crime, even if crime is not actually rising. And I say that because in most cases, or in all cases, there are different types of crimes. There's violent crimes, there's shooting crimes, there's gun crimes, there's stabbing crimes, there's kidnappings, there's rape, right? There's a number of kinds of crimes. At any given time, one type of crime is probably rising, and the others are probably falling. In fact, right now in Portland, the overall crime rate is dropping, but the shooting rate is going up, which is not a normal thing. Politicians use strong stances on crime to appear in control. If you're a politician and there's crimes and people are bringing up concerns about crimes, you have to support something that stops crime. And typically the support in politics comes from money. Shootings and murders. Let's talk about it. There's been over 1,000 shootings in 2021 in Portland alone. There have been approximately 69 murders this year, and 2/3 of those are through gun crime or shootings. Police reports and statements. The press takes police reports as fact. Their statements are made as fact. The outlaws and the homelessness. The press exalts the capture of the criminals and the displacement of homeless folks as accomplishments at the police are actually achieving. And so it gives the police the public appearance of value. So at this point, I want to stop and take a pulse. How do your communities that you live in and are part of feel about a police presence? And do those feelings change when the context is added? So I'd like to kind of pause here and see if anyone has any thoughts about that. Nobody has any thoughts about that?
You can either go into the chat or you can just unmute and speak to this.
Yes. Thanks, Sharon. And as I think about this, in the corner I've got a note here. Are we even talking to our neighbors about police? Are we talking to our parents about this? Are we talking to our children about this? Are we talking to folks at our churches about this?
Mac, I'll share. This is Malcolm.
Hey, Malcolm.
Police are just people too. In most cases, I feel they're just individuals that I consider employees of mine because I pay my taxes for them to do their job. Now, I don't like getting stopped by them because I like to go home on a regular basis. But I try not to do things to get me stopped. Yeah, and I think I am aware that their blood pressure spikes should they see me behind the wheel with their lights on, the same as my blood pressure spikes for that same reason. I mean, too often do I see people like me being shot by police, assassinated by police. But I also understand that police are people too.
I appreciate that. And police are people, right? They're folks that have a job.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it was interesting when you were presenting. I remembered when I first moved to Portland, and I think that's when they tried to get Measure 11 passed.
Yeah.
But they had this huge campaigns going on with commercials, seeing people just let out of jail. And you saw downtown, you saw the gates, and they said, pass this measure, or otherwise these people are coming into your house. I thought it was a great marketing campaign, which it was, but that was furthest from the truth. They want to put people in jails because that makes money.
Right. And so I think that's the key point, right? They keep people in jails because keeping people in jails makes money, right? And so that's why this question is so important. How do your communities feel about the police presence? Not how does the city feel or how does the county feel, the state feel, but where you are on your block, if you talk to your neighbors, in your home with your family and kids, you know, and your parents and your grandparents, in your church, in your masjid, you know, what are the feelings about police?
Live across the street from a sheriff.
Daniel, if you could handle the stack, we have a number of people who have spoken in the chat that you might want to keep the conversation flowing.
Okay, yeah, I see you, Mr. Barnett, and your name is now in this in the chat. And Mac, if you can keep an eye on that, you can follow who's there. Do you see that? Hillary Hampton, then IG, then Judith Mowry, and then Mr. Barnett.
Well, I'd like to speak now. Hampton, speak up. I feel all right with the police. I'm not anti-police. I don't want to get into that mentality of talking anti-police, because I think when we talk anti-police language, it affects young people. And I think young people need to know that they need to respect first start at home, respect their parents. And when they go to school, they need to respect their teachers. There you go. When we speak anti-police, we're giving the wrong instruction to our young people. That's right. And that is danger. That is danger. Now, we need to start at home first, because a lot of young lives is being going down the green, wasted. And the first thing we said, police. The police. Start at home, teaching our children how to be respectful to their elders. That's right. And teach them also how to be respectful to their teachers. If students or children do not respect their mothers and fathers, they are not going to respect the police. They are not going to respect the teachers. If students do not respect their teachers, they're going to defy community policing, no matter what kind of police it is. That's right. And I think all of us as a community should support the police department. not individuals that do wrong, but I'm talking about the organization itself. We need polices, and when we talk anti-police slogans without facts, when a policeman do wrong, we should name that policeman. We should have his badge number because he is an individual. He is not the police department.
That's right.
A police department consists of many people. Many people. And when you just say, give a broad sweep saying police, like that's plural. And we need to, when somebody do wrong on the police department, we need to get their name, we need to get their badge number, and then we need to get the facts what actually happened. Not just say somebody got killed. Everybody is against killing, including police.
What?
I do not believe police should get up to leave home to go out to shoot somebody.
No, they don't.
Now, there might be an individual on the police force like that, but I don't believe people goes into that profession with the idea to go out and murder people. So if we want to have business in our community, we got to have law and order.
Okay.
I see a lot of both.
Mr. Hampton, if we could move on to the next commenter, that'll give people time. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
You can hear me?
indeed.
Next in line was IG Frederick. If we could go in the order of the stack. IG, are you available? If not, then
Mr. Frederick
Ms.
just put a note in the chat, and the question that he asked was, I apologize for cutting you off there.
It's they, by the way, they is IG Frederick.
Thank you,
Yes.
appreciate that.
Sure.
It says, should children respect elders who abuse them? Should the children respect teachers who send them to the principal for speaking out on an issue that the school is teaching a racist perspective on? The police department consists of many people who are white, supremacists, and if they are not, they protect their fellow white supremacist officers. That's a note that was left by IG Frederick.
Next is Mr. Barnett.
Can you hear me? This is Mr. Barnett.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, I have to strongly disagree with the previous speaker who was giving a carte blanche, carte blanche open check to the police department. He's wrong. They're very, very wrong. For instance, if he had been up to date and aware, in Portland alone, there have been a serious number of police shootings of Black and people of color over the years. And they are never held accountable. If he wants to say there's a difference between individual behavior and organizational behavior, he needs to take a look at the research report put on by Portland Cop Watch and other groups that point to the fact that time after time, administration after administration, the police are always exonerated no matter what they do in terms of killing and or shootings. Not only that, the data, if he wants facts, needs to be of what facts that are recorded, publicly available, that show the difference between when the police department say, oh, there's this many shootings, they don't say how many of those are by policemen. When they say there are this many killings, they don't say how many of these by police, and leave the community confused and very upset, just thinking that it's all, it's just all these so-called criminals or whatever it is. He doesn't aware of how the police use their policies to grab Black young kids and people of color, Hispanics and Native Americans and so forth, and call it questioning when they're really trying to get information about them, whether they know anything or not, but to give you the impression that, oh, well, we're your friend and we're gonna do this and that, and then end up indicting somebody for some hearsay thing. There's so much information that this gentleman just really needs to get up to date on. The fact of the matter is, all he has to do is look at the reports that have come out about how many times, wherever the circumstances, the police union covers the to make sure that the police are never held accountable by all kinds of techniques that they've gotten. And they've gotten the public so confused that people are upset, rightly upset about the number of shootings, the number of deaths, and so forth. The point is, it's not that we need police. That's old time thinking. We need to be thinking, what does public safety mean? We need to be safe and find ways and procedures and programs and so forth to be safe. That doesn't mean that the police should be out there chasing down anybody and everybody anytime they want. I have been stopped by the police for nothing and then questioned and let go because they thought, oh, well, we thought it was somebody else or some other kind of excuse. No, we need to rethink what public safety means. And if there's a role for the police, then it should be very limited. The police are supposed to work for us, but they are an independent body, and even the police commissioner and even the mayor can't control them.
Thank you, Mr. Barnett. Next in line is Rhoda. I'm sorry, Rosa, then Judith, and then Malcolm. And there are also a couple of comments in the chat. If you are able to read the chat, and I don't know, Mac, if you want to get back to those at some point.
Let's take the rest of what the folks are saying first, and then we can double back. I think that everyone can check in the chat as well. I would ask the folks just to keep their comments to a couple of minutes if possible, just because there is more on the slide.
Right, Rosa, and then Judith, and then Malcolm.
All right. Thank you, Daniel, for recognizing me. And Mac, I would like to thank you for giving us this conversation, allowing us a platform to have this conversation. I'm going to preface my comment, and I will strive for brevity, by saying that I am not anti-police. I have family members who have worked in served faithfully in law enforcement. But I will say, and I'm going to frame my comments specifically from the perspective of a Black woman. I limit my night driving in Oregon to, I limit it very carefully, particularly when there are not other people in my vehicle with me. I'm concerned when and if I'm stopped by the police, if something I may say or ask could be misinterpreted. So I'm very careful and cautious. I teach my children the same thing, to be very careful about what they say, how they say it, and where they put and keep their hands. So, and I'm even more, my concern is even more heightened the further I am outside of Portland or Multnomah County, because I don't see policing or police in an isolated manner. I see them within the construct or the concept of white supremacy in the state of Oregon. Unfortunately for me, I've learned a lot about the history in preparation for publishing a book. And so I do know, and I know there's a lot more for me to learn. I certainly don't know it all, but based upon what I do know about and have experienced with respect to the white supremacy culture, I have a view of policing within that concept. And so I'm careful. I know that they do a lot of good, but I think Mr. Barnett said it. There are things that as a member, as a Black woman, as a member, an activist in the Black community, I have to be very careful. And that is how I look at it. I look at it through a lens of great care and great concern. And again, thank you for the opportunity to express that.
Thank you, Rosa. Eloquent as always.
Thank you, Rosa. Judith? Are you able to speak, Judith? Are you muted?
Sorry, I was
There you go.
muted. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Mac, and all of you for providing the space for this conversation. I've spent a lot of years listening to police and community and sort of being a facilitator, observer of these conversations. So I have a lot of thoughts about that, but I did want to answer Mac's question because I do talk to my neighbors, and I would say my community is probably like, you know, I don't know, I guess I'm not middle-aged anymore, but like just at the tail end of the baby boomers and younger. I have younger friends too, but who are, and we do talk about policing, and you know, it's such a range, right? My children are, two of them are just, don't even go there. I don't even want to hear it. But a lot of my friends it does change if we contextualize it. And Mac, I really appreciated your first slide because it's exactly what I see happening. I mean, you can just nail what you call the propaganda, right? And I am not, I have much respect and compassion for many individuals in the police force. And I believe there are people in Portland Police who want to see 21st century policing, which is the aspiration for much safer, you know, and equitable policing. But, you know, every time I see the union, it's hard for me to identify a point where the union has not pushed back on reform. And I will say that's one of my main talking points with my white community, is to point that out, that the smallest of steps, right? The whether or not we can do Portland street response without them being there, whether, you know, everything has a pushback, and the union represents the membership. And so there is that piece where you see the individuals, but when you hear the, you know, I think you know, it's very easy to vilify the union president because they're the, you know, the speakers, but they're doing their job, right? And they're representing the membership. So unless, you know, so I always feel like, look, I see you as a human being. I appreciate that you have good intent, but until I start hearing your public voice, which comes through the voice of the union leader, I am going to remain highly vigilant, concerned, and grateful for the pressure for reform.
Thank you,
I'll stop
Judith.
there.
Malcolm,
Yep,
unless you want to
it's
say
me.
something first, Mac, do you want to respond, or you want to let?
No,
Malcolm?
Thank you, Mac. President. Thank you, Mac, for bringing this conversation to the floor. In a future conversation, I think we should probably invite the chief of police to have the conversation with us. My community, what we think about police are people too, which means most of them are good. Some of them are really bad. Some people do go into law enforcement to pay off student loans. Some go into law enforcement because they want to kill people. So yeah, they're both sides when you look at police as their own community. It was brought up the police union. That's a big problem. There needs to be police reform, but the police union, unfortunately, is just doing their job, which is to protect an officer, no matter how wrong he may be. They're just like a team. If they don't weed out the bad apples are going to give them a bad rap, because nobody really remembers the time that the police officer stopped because you were changing a tire. Yeah, those are my quick views for it. If anybody ever wants to run for office and they want to support the police, but they want to bust the union, chances are they're going to get a vote from somebody like me. I do believe police need to be respected, but I also believe if police break the law, their punishment should be greater. If I'm paying you to protect and serve, and you're not protecting and serve, I want you underneath the jail. That's my 2 cents for my community.
Thank you, Malcolm. Mac?
I appreciate this conversation so much, you guys don't even know. I would like to read a comment that was sent to me anonymously and in this group, and I would like to just read it as is. And it's something else that is on a lot of our, I think, our minds, those of us that are in the streets often. And it says, "I'd like to remain anonymous for various reasons. Out of respect, I don't want to take the discussion off track. However, it's helpful. It would be helpful to address the issue that while the media portrays much of the gun violence as involving young Black males, it is very unclear how these young males have access to so much guns and ammo. How would we be able to document the claims of some gang members who say that they are being paid per head? Who is paying them? How does rising crime benefit the powers that be, as well as the old money in this city? Can we look beyond what we see and look at on the root of what drives our local economy? I think that's also a good point. So I'm gonna go forward in the slides now and kind of jump into our next things. I think you guys actually prefaced some of the things I want to talk about. And at the end, I want to make a couple of comments on a couple of things I heard and a couple of thought processes. But again, I really appreciate the both sides. And I think that there are probably some great things that came out of, especially the folks that are more pro-police. I'll explain that in a minute. So next thing on the slide here, if I can get it to work. Okay, context. The police do not actually prevent a crime. This is a fact. They respond to it. Police do not do well at clearing cases. Police are not answering the calls currently, i.e. they have been striking on the job. And there is no correlation, as we can see in the graphs below, between funding and the police's ability to solve rapes or crimes. In fact, during the highest funded time, the police solved the least amount of crimes. So oftentimes we say things like, you know, the police, need more resources. But in reality, when they have more resources, they do less. In fact, the time that the crime was lowest was back in 2014, 15, when the funding was at $183 million, which is 50 million less than it is now, which is actually what folks asked for as a defunding measure last year. So often folks said that 50 million, it came out of nowhere, and that's exactly where it came from. Yeah, so that's, again, this is kind of just a visual showing that, you know, funding police has not been working in solving crimes in any way. If we also look at the Portland Police's assault rate compared to national, it's lower, and the cost per officer is much higher. Police PR, let's talk about it. And someone, I talked about the union, the PPA, the PB, often via the PPA, excels at community outreach. It's not a lie. They do a great job at this. They often target the elderly, folks in the suburbs, as well as religious groups. I didn't have space on here, but they also usually tend to find victims, families of crimes, exploit them immediately. Police activist groups, there are many, I don't need to name them, there are many so-called community groups that are actually just led by a police, a former police union representatives, and those are very common, as well as just ardent police supporters, folks that have been, you know, next to the police and supporting the police for decades. And many of those folks are Black folks in our own communities. Oftentimes they lead churches. There's also Let's Get Along forums, and I talked about this a bit. These are forums designed to discuss like a community safety, but instead they get flipped and you talk about policing. So typically, this is really important because typically, if we have a conversation around the police safety, someone says, hey, we should invite the police. And then the police come in with all their funding and make it about policing. And so we really never have actual conversations around community safety. All we talk about is policing and how the police can be involved in programs. And then we have the Kids of Cops programs. And these are our programs that voluntarily put Black children under the watch of police. So Coffee with a Cop, programs that have police go, kids go out and ride with cops. And what this typically does, especially for Black youth, is it puts kids immediately on the police's radar. And if they are compliant, then they become moldable, and if they are not compliant, then they become, pipelineable. And those are kind of the options. So I have a personal issue with these programs, but that is definitely a thing, and that's definitely a way to look at them. They're often sold as if the kids can meet the cops and the cops can meet the kids, then they're going to get along later. But that has nothing to do with reality. A thought break here. I want you guys to see this headline and think about this for a second. It's been reported that elephants have evolved to be tuskless in response to the ivory poachers. And I think about this, and I think about how a species being attacked has evolved to stop showing its dangerous side in order to stop being hunted. And if this can happen to a species, then what can happen to a people? If that relates to you in this conversation, you've got it. If it doesn't, I'm sorry. Think about it some more. Any questions there? Let's check the chat.
I'm not seeing anyone in the stack. Speak up though if I've missed you.
Did I mishear you, Mac, that you were suggesting a short break or?
No, not a short break.
Great.
Just a thought process. A short thought process there. Yeah, I'll keep on going. Once you guys think about that for a bit.
I do see that Judith has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, Mac, I'm wondering what are your thoughts about, where we are right now in our world, with I feel like we're really have a fight on our hands for democracy, that there is such a strong movement toward authoritarianism, and a lot of fear has been generated, both by, as you were saying, the increase in crime, but also I think in the fact that we've been separated, we've been isolated from each other, and I think that isolation creates a lot of that anxiety. So just thinking about the things that are going on in context to what I feel is the urgency of the time. And I'm just wondering if you have thoughts about that.
I do. I have a lot of thoughts about that, honestly. I do think that isolation breeds a need for authoritarianism, and that's because it breeds fear. I was on one of those calls with the cops and the people in the communities and the schools the other day, and we talked about how crime is different to people. If someone gets shot in your neighborhood and you have no idea who got shot, that creates a different level of fear than if someone gets shot in your neighborhood and you know that it was Junie that just shot TK, and you know that, and you understand why. As soon as you understand what happened and why, the fear goes away. But if you look at how we often talk about crime, it's always mysterious, especially in the press. It's always mysterious. Someone got shot. There were 100 bullets fired. No one knows who got hit. No one knows the victims. All the information, the cops never found anyone, right? So this tells folks that there's killers on the loose. So a lot of it is in the presentation and is in the understanding of what a community is. If you're all by yourself and all you're seeing are things happening around you, that puts you in a place to kind of think there needs to be a control out there, because I have none. If we're all together, there's a lot more control as individuals all together. And so I think that the two are definitely related in that, if that makes sense.
There are a couple of people in stack. I also just want to point out the time. We're
Yeah.
a little bit past, so I don't know how much you have left, but just keep that in mind. So next in the stack is Malcolm.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to keep it short. Being a police is not a bad thing. If you look at the last contract the city of Portland put up for them, I would encourage any young person in the community to get that type of a job where you can retire after 20 years and then get the same job with a sign-on bonus plus a raise. And the benefits are really great. The unfortunate part is my community, our community, sees a stigma with getting that type of job. That's all I had.
Thank you. Was anyone else in the stack?
No, that's all. Well, Sharon is asking if any people who have not spoken up would like to speak up. She mentioned in particular Brian, Barbara, Brooklyn, Katie, Jonna, Harold. Give other people a chance.
Just letting the folks know I'm watching.
And thanks, Roy. By the way, I wasn't sure if you were referring to a survey, someone in the branch had sent out, but you clarified that it was a survey that you got on the phone.
Oh, you actually got it. Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna go on to the next slide and then we'll have some time for questions and we'll close out here. The next slide here. Oh, sure. Okay, so polling. This is a big thing that happens right now. Conservative and pro police groups are numerous. They're ominous, they have ominous names and they are well funded. The People for Portland is a dark money group who does not disclose their donors, and they push for, they are pushing a police reform agenda. Excuse me, I missed that word. A police reform agenda in fall of 2021. So it's kind of their turn. They just recently created a poll and worked with Mingus Maps, showing that Portlanders wanted more police at an 81% clip. Their methodology was quickly discussed. They had 600 people that they asked, mostly on the west side. And the questions were also extremely misleading. And there was a lot of articles around that as well. Social media and press, these groups, just like any other kind of extremist, media groups, they thrive on social media through arguments and, the algorithm. And they also typically have easy access to a conservative press. So these surveys will drop and they'll have the story in press the same day, the next day. If they have slander about a particular a city commissioner, they have it out at 5 a.m. in the morning. So these groups are typically tied in, again, in the same ways as our like community groups back to the PPA. They're usually funded by the PPA, and that's a really important thing. I think that being anti-police is fine. I mean, I am, but focusing on a realistic and a dynamic community-based solutions is where the prize can be found. Just the other day on a call I had, again, with police and school officials and whatnot, I sat on that call and I had a speaking part or whatever, but as I spoke, I spoke from outside of an event. I was working with, youth and young artists of color, and everyone else called in from their office or their home, right? And to me, it's really important. This is a discussion about community safety on a Thursday, and everyone is at home. How are we going to stop crime if we're not out, if we're not outside? How are we going to help these youth supposedly if we're not around them? How is the work going to get done if we keep on talking about it and not actually being out there? And not being out there, the easy answer is more cops. If I don't want to be outside, I'm scared of the kids, I'll send the cops out there. I'll have the cops just walk in circles. But then we also complain when the cops are arresting our children, when the cops are killing our children, when the cops are abusing our children, kidnapping our children, raping our children. And that's really important to also think about. So in the in the spirit of questions, I had a couple of thoughts, if I could, on things that came up earlier. A couple of concepts. Are the police authority? We talked about respecting the police because we have to respect our mothers and our teachers. Are the police authority, or are they an arm of the government? Do we need to respect the police to respect our mothers? Do we need to respect the police to respect our teachers? Is that really an issue? Is that really a thing? Or can I have respect for certain things that are good and that love me, and not have respect for those that don't? Are the police being held accountable? We often talk about bad apples. You know, some police are bad, some police are good. But if that's true, then how come they stand together in not being accountable? Where are the police that are standing up and saying these other cops are bad apples, these other cops are racist, these other cops are hanging don't tread on me flags and Blue Lives Matter signs, and putting OK's symbols in their windows and turning them in? How come that's not happening? How come none of the police that have shot people in the back in horrible situations, just pulling up and seeing someone with a gun and shooting, how come these cops have not been disciplined in any way ever in the city? We also need to talk about, you know, we say if we want business to thrive, then we need cops. And think about where that starts for us. Is our goal to be a part of white business? To be a part of a settler economy? Is that our goal? The origins of policing in Portland, in Oregon, I think that Sharon touched on, touched on that in the chat, and I think that Michelle did too. Our mayor has a grandfather, a great grandfather, who helped with a lot of the capturing of natives in order to build, you know, settlements, and the police are formed out of those groups. Inviting the police, you know, to meetings. Why? Right? Why? And then we talk about the police are doing their jobs. A lot of police join up to pay off student loans, to help their families to get money to retire. So do gang members. They're also doing their jobs. So if they're not doing it right, is the answer to give them more money? Or is the answer to try and help them and change the situation? So I think that we have to stop looking at police as a magical organization that always needs support, and rather look at them as an arm of an organization that's failing a lot of people. Because if any organization were doing as poorly as the police, with a 12% clearance rate as the highest clearance rate in the last 10 years, they would be defunded and replaced, or defunded and reformed. So as we talk about reform, there's often reforms that are being suggested, even by the police right now. Give us body cams, right? But this is a demand that we had 10 years ago, and now they're offering it up, and I would put money that they still don't do it, and it'll be the same group asking for it that shuts it down in 6 months after the election. So, any questions out there?
We had we had Jonah in the stack. I did see Malcolm's hand raised again. I don't know if we want to keep going, but that's the case. So Jonah?
Okay. I see that Sharon has suggested that this be continued as a part 2 or part 3, and perhaps have more to this conversation. I just really wanted to lay a framework and get the organization and our membership thinking about this in different ways. I don't think there's a super answer. I don't think that it's that simple, you know, but I do think that there's a lot of work to be done, and we have to look at the issue soberly and accept all points of view as real, and then really do the research and determine what's valid. And I'm open to all suggestions.
Hi, Jonna Davis here, she, her pronouns. And actually, my comments have been addressed in just the last 2 comments. I would love to see this discussion continued. And I do believe that the timing is critical. I believe that there is hope. There are many of us in what I would I guess, say the sandwich generation. I am a Panther Cub, so I've seen quite a bit from previous years and efforts. However, I also have young adult children, and the things that we're able to see now, and the information and the access to data, the numbers, uh, things don't always line up when you really look at some of the numbers. And so I would love to see this discussion continued and covered in broader terms, and would suggest that at some point the youth council or this next generation is really brought to the scene. I appreciate the current or most recent efforts, Mac, that have gone forward, and I would just love to see more of that happening. I am a former City Hall commissioner staffer. I was married to someone who worked for the Portland Police Bureau. And I have folks in my background who are in law enforcement. So I'm not coming from a perspective of someone who hates police or thinks that we can survive without some system. However, I do realize that it is just that, a system. And systems are in place for a reason, and they serve people. But sometimes we need to stop and ask, what people? Who are they serving?
And I think it's super important to also note, thank you, Jonah. As you said, we don't have to hate police. We don't have to hate anyone. Hating people has never been the goal. In fact, that's a talking point that the police usually use. Stop the hate, right? But then they go and give you cops to tell you to stop the hate. That's a really important point. We're not extremists. Being a radical is not being an extremist. Being a radical is someone that wants to change the status quo. And I think it's really important to be able to differentiate between the extremists, because there are extremists on our side, and the radicals who are saying, hey, there is a way to radically change the system. And we don't have to hate the cops to do that. We have to, it's like if I want Nabisco to stop, hurting their workers, I don't have to hate Nabisco employees or Nabisco managers. I just have to say you're doing a wrong thing and we need to fix that. And that's what needs to happen with the police. We don't have to hate them to change their behavior. They'll try and make it a personal thing and say, hey, I'm just trying to get home to my family and I'm just trying to pay off my, that's fine. But there's a lot of jobs out there. That's all I've got. So thank you guys very much. I'll be happy to discuss it further. I would love to continue this and we can look at doing this in a more public forum if we want to or whatever else. But, again, let's just talk about it and put this, on the table and stop avoiding it with, lyrics that we use.
There you go.